Hello, and welcome to Euphoria, a studio spotlighting and uplifting the diverse voices across the TTRPG industry in Europe and outside of the US. You can find Euphoria's socials listed below, and July is Disability Pride Month, so I am very, very glad to have with me four incredible disabled people from across the European TTRPG community who have joined me for this panel on disability representation in TTRPGs. My name is Kieran. I use they, them pronouns. I am a white, non binary person with long, dark brown hair and beard, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a pink carnation in my hair. Behind me is a light brown backdrop featuring red, green, yellow flowering vines. Our stream overlay today is based around the Disability Pride flag, so we have a dark grey background, and in two corners there's a band of 5 stripes in mellow colours: green, blue, white, yellow, red. And unfortunately, our good friend Lu Yu is unable to join us today, but I still want to acknowledge all the work she's put in preparing for this panel. Everybody involved in this panel has sacrificed a lot of time and energy to make sure it happens, so thank you, Lu Yu, for your part in that. Now, starting with Miranda and going clockwise around the screen, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and perhaps give us one example of a time when disability representation in a TTRPG setting has brought you joy. So please go ahead, Miranda.
Hello, everyone. I'm Miranda. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman in her early 30s. I have short blue hair, and I'm wearing a t-shirt with a strappy top over the top of it. My background is the wall in my kitchen, so there's some art on the wall behind me of kind of, I don't know, flowers, I guess. And aside from that, the screen is blank. Um, Gosh, a time that disability representation has brought me joy. Honestly, I played in a game of Monster Hearts on this channel, and I played a character who used crutches to get around, and I had so much fun using them in combat. Like, you've never seen such joy as swiping someone's legs out from under them with a crutch in the middle of school, or getting involved in a fight by pinning someone to the wall with your crutch. So much fun to be had with that. And it really brought me joy to incorporate that into Monster Hearts, and the world that we were playing in. So that was great.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing. And Penny, you are next on the overlay.
Hi everyone, my name's Penny. I am a Romy, gender fluid work person, and people who know me well know why. I've got dreadlocks that are in autumnal colours, orange, brown, black, and I've got a nasal cannula that is linked to an oxygen machine because I've got AIHA, which is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. In the background, you can see some silver wallpaper and silver bedspread. Pronouns are all, any, being gender fluid, and a moment in TTRPGs which brought me joy. This is a really, really big one for me and for my whole family, and it's Inspire Isles RPG by Hatchlings Games, which I think that a lot of people watching this will know. I will never be able to thank the creator, the whole team who made that game enough for making it, because at its heart is teaching families and children, the people who play it, the power of sign language. Now, my little boy is selectively mute, and for him it was something magical and something affirmative, that, yeah, as I said, it wasn't just, oh, the doctors are telling you have to do this, mum's telling you have to do this. It was something that was fun and that was uniquely his and a part of his little magical world. So that was that for me and for our whole family.
Oh, that's really, really lovely. Thank you for sharing, Penny. It sounds like that was incredible. We'll pass over to Angel now, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Angela Moore. My pronouns are any, all, or she, him, whichever works best. I am a disabled and chronically ill trans mask brown indigenous Mexican. I'm a game designer and podcaster with long straight hair. I'm not currently live on camera because of the amazing accessibility tools that we have here. We have my headshot and my voice. So the headshot photo that you're seeing is a bit older, but you see me looking into the camera with self-cut, choppy, layered hair in front of a small office setting with a mask. Always wear one on the desk next to my glasses, without which I cannot see. But it's a cute photo. And a time for me personally that disability representation has brought me joy in TTRPGs is, I think the most standout time is when I was hired to write for the game Queers. And in the pitching process, they let me pitch one of basically everything: an adventure, a setting, villains, several adventures, and a character. And what they chose of all of the things that I pitched was the character Nina Rosado. And Nina Rosado is a character that has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, like I do, and uses the same mobility aids, which is a wheelchair and a cane. And I got to keep every element of her that I created. She uses her wheelchair as an aid in both her super powered Power Rangers like form, her normal form. And they were so enthusiastic and supportive and listened. I got to have a huge say in the actual art of the game that depicted her. So she really got to look exactly like she looked in my mind. Her disability tools were like they looked in my mind. And it meant a lot to me to see her brought to life and to be so celebrated in the release of the game. So that has brought me joy and a new benchmark for what I want from the games that I work with in terms of enthusiasm and readiness to meet you and actually listen to you as the expert, so to say, in the room on disability representation. I thought that that was a wonderful experience, and I think about her all the time.
Thank you for sharing that. Again, that's lovely. You've all given really lovely answers, and it would be remiss of me not to give my own answer after asking you to give such well thought out answers. So, for me, a point which has brought me joy is I played one of the very first times I played as a player rather than a GM was in a game of Gothic Society, and I was playing as an ambulatory wheelchair user. Like me, I'm also an ambulatory wheelchair user, and at the time, I did not have a particularly healthy relationship with my disability. I was pushing myself well beyond what my body kept telling me were my limits, and it was having a negative effect on me. And seeing how this character, Lilius, was able to use whatever aid was appropriate at the time, was safe at the time, whether that was her chair or her stick, and damn the inconvenience that may cause to somebody else. It's it gave me the tools I needed to apply that to myself. When I got those urges of, no, you can walk, you should be walking, that very internalized ableism that had been taught to me for such a long time, I could now say, no, no, if Lilius can be sensible if Lilius can be sensible about this, then so can you. And it's led me to have a much healthier relationship with my body and with my disability. And it's, I suppose, in a way, led me to here because there's no way I would have been comfortable pitching something like this if I wasn't comfortable with myself as a disabled person. And playing Lilius was a big part of how I got to that point. Lovely to be back here with Luyu, who unfortunately was not able to make us make it on our first recording date, but we've managed to schedule something in for a supplementary recording. So thank you very, very much for agreeing to come back.
Of course, and thank you,
here.
Darcy. You're goated.
Yes, Darcy puts in so. You can't see this, but Darcy just turned on the camera to shake her head. But which is prompting me to go even harder on this than I would have. Yes, you are an excellent producer. You've put in so much work. We really, really appreciate it. And the more you deny it, the more we'll say it. So. Oh well, we know you heard it.
Mhm.
So, Luyu, would you like to tell us and everybody watching, listening, who you are? Give us name, pronouns, a brief visual description, and then tell us maybe just one time that disability representation in TTRPGs has brought you joy.
Sure. Hello, my name is Luyu. I use she, her pronouns. I am an Asian American woman with a dress that looks like a shaded, dappled grove. And I've got medium length hair. And I am so excited to talk about Woo! Uh, about disability representation in games. I am a ambulatory wheelchair user. I am a type 2 diabetic. I have a few other various things, and I have my favorite assistive tool, my swaggy ass cane, who is yet unnamed. But if you have names, let me know. Let's talk about joy in TTRPGs. I will say the first time I ever encountered a disabled character in any TTRPG was Dagon and the combat wheelchair in Critical Role. Critical Role was actually not my intro into tabletop, but it was my introduction into tabletop where I could see like a story and like character development. And this was also important for me because Dagon's representation was and like his wheelchair use was not a plot device. It was not something to be overcome. It was just something that was a part of him. And he was still able, I think he uses he, him pronouns. He was still able to be a wilderness guide and play like a role in the story. And when I was watching that, my mouth was on the floor because I, at the time, did not know that you could do that in games. I was the only female GM that I knew, and the only queer GM, the only GM of color, and so all of that was such a shock to see on like such a big platform. So my most joyous first representation.
Oh, that is lovely. I've to admit, never seen a single episode of Critical Role. Now I may need to go and look it up just for that one character. So now that we know everybody, we can get started. So first thing we want to discuss, there's a lot of discussion had about not just ensuring representation, but ensuring good representation. So first question for anybody who wants to answer is, what is good representation? How do we ensure that that when we are representing disability in our games, whether we're writing them, playing them, making art for them, whatever else, how do we make sure it's good representation? And what does good representation actually mean?
I mean, I'll jump in. I think primarily it's about it being based in real experience, whether that is your own personal lived experience or work that you've done to talk to people with the disability that you're trying to portray and get to know them. I think there's also a big element of rounded characters. You don't want disabled characters to be completely defined by their disability. None of us here are defined by our disabilities. They can be large parts of our day-to-day lives, they can be large parts of how we interact with the world, but we all do other things too, as evidenced by being on this panel. And so you want to reflect that in your disabled characters as well. I think those are the kind of two pillars for me.
Yeah. I think that good representation is representation that checks itself. You know, you have to always ask yourself, even as a disabled person playing an authentic experience, you know, we're not trying to just regurgitate our life onto the table uncritically. You have to remember that like this isn't no lived life anymore. This is an artistic representation and people are not going to see it as you see your own experiences. So you have to ask yourself, if I say this, if I do this, am I carrying water for anybody I don't want to be carrying water for? You know, is this something that I can portray that people will be able to understand, or how do I need to adjust how I say this or show this so that they understand what I am trying to say? And you can't control obviously how people take everything, and being real and authentic is at the core of everything that one should be doing here. But it's always important to ask, like, is this something that I'm sharing and it's going to help people? Is this something I'm sharing where perhaps this should be, you know, talked about with some people behind the scenes first to make sure that we're not accidentally carrying water for people that oppose us really in our existence and everything. There's such a big nuance for our stories, and there's so much in our experience that it's impossible to reflect everything at the same time and everything perfectly, because we don't feel the same way every day perfectly, you know? Like, it's always such a process. But it's always good to check and be like, "Okay, from every angle, as much as possible, what is this also saying that I maybe don't mean to be saying?" And then you always catch things, and those can help personal growth, and they can also help, you know, tell better stories.
Absolutely. I agree with what both of you have said, and adding on to that as well, I think that if we are being consciously aware of the types of stories that we are telling about ourselves and about others who share our disability or share the disability that the characters that we are portraying have, we need to make sure that we are not always telling the stories that show us as limited and being defined by those limitations. There's a wonderful term which I learned quite recently, which is called spoony hackers. And it said that essentially gaining a disability does turn you into a spoony hacker, someone who now has to look at life as a hacker, not look at life and say, oh no, I can't do this anymore. Because 9 times out of 10, you have to do it, you know. So it's not a question of us now sitting down and saying, oh dear, I can't take part in life anymore. It's saying, how can I take part in life? How can I hack life so that I can take part? And fantasy settings can be a joyful and empowering way to showcase that aspect of disability. And we need to make sure that when we're striving to be authentic, we are being authentic from every angle, that we are authentically showing, yes, it's difficult, but also authentically showing that we are inventive and we are clever and we are powerful and we are able in different ways to overcome the challenges that we're presented with every day.
I love that. I'd not heard that term before, spoony hacker, but I really love that explanation, and it marries perfectly with certainly with my experience of trying to work out what I can do and I'm working at how I can do the things that I need to do and want to do in a way which is safe and sustainable. Which again, as you say, it's a big part of It's a big part of my experience. It's probably a big part of a lot of other disabled people's experiences. So I love that spoony hackathon. I'm going to be taking that forward, I think. First question to ask you, Lu Yu, is in your head, what is it that makes disabled representation good disabled representation? And why is it important that we try to make sure that is what we're doing?
Yes, that's a great question. I know that a lot of people who are GMs or players who don't personally have disability struggle with the idea of representing or playing a disabled PC or an NPC. And it is also, I imagine, fairly easy to fall into certain pitfalls of tropiness or things like that. Um, One thing that I think is important is to hear from people who are differently abled, listen to their experiences. As a GM myself, I have role played people who are differently abled from me in a way that I don't understand. So, for example, my partner, Tyler, has autism and ADHD, and I don't. And if I wanted to play someone who had that, like an NPC, I could ask him. I could, read or consume other media by people who may or may not be in the TTRPG space, who talk about their experiences, and that would be very helpful. And I am pretty happy to say that at least my home table have been very, very respectful and, you know, playing along with meeting at the level of any disabled or differently abled people in my home games. Roundabout way to say it.
No, it's lovely to hear that people have been so respectful,
Yeah.
because obviously that's not always the case.
Mhm.
But it's having people, and especially if they are pre-disabled, who are willing to engage with you, is, especially when you're playing at tables which are not necessarily majority disabled. It can be
Yes.
very difficult to bring disabled characters into your game.
Mhm.
So it's lovely to hear you've got people there who engage with it respectfully.
Yeah. One thing I'll add is sometimes I see people doing disability as an aesthetic choice, and I think that can depend. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. When I see people who do not have disabilities doing it, it's often in the form of someone has lost an arm, but they have a cybernetic arm or cybernetic limb and things like that. And that it depends on how you play it. I think that if you make it so that they can do absolutely everything that an able-bodied person can do and it absolutely never comes into the story, I would do some thinking about that. Because obviously having a prosthetic in real life is quite different from having a an arm. Of course, allowing for fantasy things. However, when I see people with disabilities playing disabled characters, sometimes they don't want to get into the whole thing about that. And then I feel like there is some flexibility there. If you're not sure, I would talk to your table about it. Ask your GM, or if you're the GM, ask your players. Ask them how they feel and if they're comfortable with certain things, and just be flexible and willing to hear things. And I think as long as you have that attitude, you're going to be okay.
Well, thank you. That was very eloquent, and I'm sure a lot of people will find that very helpful. So we mentioned that part of good representation is making sure that we are not defining characters entirely by their disability. That these are well-rounded people and that their disability is part of them, an important part of them, but is not the entirety of who they are. And that it's not just tacked on as an afterthought either. That it's so thinking about that, how how do we go about ensuring that we keep those principles as part of the basic blueprint of how we make our games, how we play our games, how we create these characters, how we create these worlds even. Um, how do we ensure that we keep these principles of good representation that all three of you have so beautifully presented? How do we ensure we're always sticking to those and not just putting them in afterwards after we've made the main thing?
I think a big part of it is that everyone has it's important to remember, just like you come into this world and racism is a core part of absolutely every interaction you have, that you need to actively be unlearning, actively be challenging, and that never stops. There's so many other things baked into the world, and like ableism is at the core of so many things. And as we've also spoken, privately and in developing this panel, that intersectional representation is very important specifically, and it's important to check how these things interact with each other. I think that part of what needs to happen in order to make sure that you're including and ensuring good representation as a blueprint of everything you make and run as a game designer or as a GM, as a campaign designer, writer, anything in this space, is that you need to be checking with your personal base ideology. You need to combat ableism. You need to be anti-ableist actively, constantly. You need to seek out things that challenge your ableism. You need to listen to us when we say, hey, that's ableist, not just be like, do I agree or not? I'm like, it's not your place to agree. It's your place to listen. You can evaluate. I mean, none of us are all going to agree. Even in this panel, we're never going to agree on absolutely everything. There's always going to be nuances. There's always going to be things that like I might see that you might not see, or things that you see that I may not see. We're especially because it's so baked in everything. It's baked in our language. I mean, there's people saying things, they have no idea it's ableist that they're saying these things. Just like, you say a phrase and you don't know that like it has a really racist origin. Somebody needs to tell you, or you need to find out, and you need to be seeking out opportunities to learn and to work on your base way of understanding and engaging with this world. And is it exhausting? Absolutely. But, like I can't turn off engaging with racism because I'm brown. Have never been able to, I will never be able to. And I'm disabled, and I've been disabled for such a long time that like I will never be able to turn that off either. And so it's important for those with the privilege to choose to engage with ableism to make that choice and to make it a part of their ideology. And it's important for us to listen to each other because we all have different illnesses, different abilities, different disabilities. And it's important for us to listen to each other, to learn about each other and each other's needs as a base principle of how we engage with the world. And that will trickle into what we do. Because much like being disabled informs everything that we do inherently, because it's the lens throughout which we engage with the world, it'll end up being a lens through which you engage with your art.
Definitely agree with all of that. I mean, I was thinking about ways that you can bake it into your like round the table sessions. I mean, for context, I'm just a player, occasional DM, not that good at it, but mostly playing. And so for me, I think there's things that you can do in a pre-game world where you're thinking about character creation, like even just basic things like including, is this character disabled in the like, what's their name? What's their physical description? What's their gender or apparent gender? Including a question there about disability can make people, particularly pre-disabled people, stop and think, oh, maybe I should think about that. That's an aspect of this character that would be cool and interesting to play. So there's stuff you can do there, including ableism in lines and veils, lots of things there. But I also think really it's about communicating at your table and being able to call each other in, being able to point out when representation isn't going so well or when there just isn't enough of it. I mean, for me personally, there have been times where I've set up a disabled character, been playing a disabled character, but the rest of the table maybe just aren't as comfortable and familiar with disabled characters in tabletop. And so they kind of just don't want to engage with it. They're not against it, but they also don't want to refer to it for fear of getting it wrong or upsetting me or, something going wrong with it. So I think it's great to have open communication where you can say, "Hey, I've noticed that, like, it's never relevant that I'm using a wheelchair. Probably should do at some point. How do we get down that flight of stairs?" Don't know. Just kind of making it an open and continual conversation at the table.
I totally agree with what you've both said. So I'm going to just mention a point about game design when you're actually a creator. So we've spoken about being players and we've spoken about the stories that we tell at the table, but when you're actually designing the mechanics of your TTRPG, I come across this a lot, helping people do this as a sensitivity reader and as an editor as well. You can actually think about the way your mechanics work for disabled characters at the inception of your game, at the very first ideas when you're thinking, what mechanics am I going to use here to make this game a game? You should be thinking at that stage, what if somebody wants to bring a disabled character to the table? And there's been quite a lot of contention about this. The things I agree with and things I don't agree with. And a lot of it is personal preference. As disabled people, as you said, we're all going to have slightly different viewpoints about what we like, whether we want ramps in our dungeons or we don't want ramps in our dungeons and things like that. It's a lot of that is a personal preference to your character. But you can think mechanically as well as having those discussions on a player level. And the way that I advise people to approach this is to introduce mechanics that are not all about limiting the character and making it a character that is not fun to play anymore, because they become so limited that in your stress to create authentically limited characters, you create something that nobody wants to play. Not even a disabled character with that issue. It's not fun. So instead, a better way to approach it is to create mechanics that will help a disabled character to overcome obstacles which you are narratively planning to put in their way, to make interesting puzzles and experiences for that disabled player, just the same way that you would with a player who does not have a disability. You've got this, game designers. You can do it.
We believe in you. Oh, no,
Yes.
that's. I think that's a really interesting point, and it's something that I would agree I don't see enough of. It's something that, as TTRPGs in my head, have an interesting, well, all forms of storytelling. All forms of storytelling are interesting in their own ways, but the ways that you have these codified mechanics in games, they can introduce ways of, what am I trying to say here? They can make it easier for people who want to tell these stories but find that in other mediums, they find it difficult perhaps because they don't necessarily have that framework of, okay, how do I represent this experience that I've had or that someone I love has had, and we want to tell this story. And bringing in these mechanics, I think, is it's a great way of encouraging people to tell meaningful disabled stories, which I think is a real strength of TTRPGs. So thank you for bringing that up. What we'll move on to is how do we make that representation? How do we make it part of the basic blueprint of every game that we are making or running? I know you are primarily a GM, so I suspect you are quite well placed to talk about this on the running side of things.
So I have actually fielded this question by players before, not about disability, but about other things like ethnicity, gender, sexual representation. I remember I had a player in one of my home games early on ask me, why is it that you decided to make this character, I don't know, something like trans or queer or a woman or whatever, when they didn't need to be? And my answer to that, of course, they were asking this in good faith, just didn't understand. And for me, it's normalization. It's like the more you see people like you or people of all different types in the games that you run or the games that you play in, the less it feels like, oh, that one character in this one plot line has this thing that's different about them. There must be like a reason. Sometimes, I mean, in real life, there's like hardly ever a reason for this sort of thing. It's just people are people and we just happen to be like this. Sometimes they're even in games, obviously it's a lot of real world experiences shorthanded, and sometimes in movies it can be like there's a plot reason. But I find that for me, the more you normalize it, the less it's called out by players or other people when you're playing as if it's a plot device when it's not.
How does anybody else have any experiences that they'd like to share about how a game mechanic can help celebrate a disabled identity, and to help us tell those stories that we're talking about? Or on the inverse, if there's anything where you think, okay, this could be done, this has promise, but it could be done better.
I do have a game called Low Magic Weekend that I designed because I was having a particularly low magic weekend myself. And the game is about a coven of witches as players who have a chronic illness. It's not more closely defined because, I mean, honestly, all of us have spoons in rations. I think all of us can relate to it differently. And I wanted to leave that part of the narrative open for people to plug their own experiences into it, their own emotions into it. But the way that it mechanically reflected is that this coven of witches is supposed to go to basically not named, but like Walpurgisnacht, the big night of witches, throw this massive rager for a whole weekend. All you do is dance and party. They wake up on, Saturday morning. They're like, it's not happening. It's not happening. My magic is low. And when my magic is low, everything about me is exhausted. And that also means that the magic is not performing how you're used to it to be performing. And as a way of integrating the experience of disability and chronic illness mechanically into the game, that means that the character type that you choose has consequences. If you're a sun witch, usually you could lay in the sun, you could bask like a salamander on a rock. But when your magic is low, you can barely stand the light. You have incredible light sensitivity. You have, your ability to craft these beautiful plays of light and illusion are completely off. Everything you're going to try is going to go in a different area of magic unintentionally. And so this list of self-care things you would usually do, because many of us have likely experienced wanting to do self-care because we don't feel well. We don't feel well enough to do it. And then we need mutual care. And mutual care is such a core foundational principle in disability communities, like real communities that have formed, small ones, interpersonal ones, larger ones, mutual aid groups, mutual assistance of somebody picking up the spoons you don't have to help you is a core part of our existence. It's something that we rely on, which is a very complicated emotional experience because forcibly relying on mutual care is not a fun feeling, although receiving it can be very empowering. So it's a very difficult experience. And so the gameplay is you want to do these nice things to make yourself feel better. And so does everybody else in the coven. But you are mechanically at a disadvantage when you roll. And a way that I've integrated this is that you can't fail. You just get redirected. So if you fail a roll trying to succeed in your agenda, it means that you've accidentally accomplished somebody else's task for them. And they, in addition to their turn, get to try to help you back as an additional role. So not only do they, you play, everybody's playing their game still, everybody's still trying to, relax and rest. And then with each role also come journal prompts for the real person, reflection that you can share with people. If there's something where it's like, I would like some soothing background noise, and this is a spell that I can usually cast, either you succeed or you don't, and somebody else, you help somebody else, but you have to answer, like, share a joyous musical memory with the group. Like, what is a song that always makes you feel calm? What makes you feel safe? And so in this case, trying to reflect your personal values of mutual care, self-care, and the self-respect that it takes to develop to know and respect your limits, which is so difficult for so many of us, and also constantly in flux, is something that, like, you can reflect in the disability, in the mechanics that reflect the disability aspect and the experience. And of course, a lot of that comes from, like, having authentic experience myself. That's how I came up with the game, but also, through, like, the people that you interact with and the values that you have. So I think that it's possible to celebrate these things by taking a step back, looking at your mechanics and being like, how can I bring the real person and their experience with their disability into it? I can ask them these questions. There can be prompts. There can be, ways to open up to your fellow players and your friends, and then there's also, with this game, real life self-care that comes with the actions. So sometimes it's those journal prompts and sometimes it's get a blanket. Get a cooling blanket, get a warm blanket, whatever you need, get a blanket. And exactly, I'm covered in my cooling blanket. Fucking feat of technology here. And actively take care of yourself. Now, obviously, not everybody who's playing this game is going to be in the middle of a flare-up. Much likely, probably not quite so dire. Otherwise, difficult to play things, difficult to focus, sit, etc. But these are also, like, preventative acts. So it's like, how do we mix taking care of ourselves? How do we mix the experience of not being able to do something for yourself, but also mitigate the frustration that causes and turn it into maybe helping each other. And then also a great way to remind people that, like, you can help each other, you can lean on each other, and integrate this into a gaming experience to kind of help reflect these elements of life that we have to live with, the self and mutual care and the preventative self-care as well that we often have to engage in order to try to mitigate the spoon rations that might befall us.
Oh, that sounds really lovely. Can you remind us of the name for anyone who's listening who wants to go and look that up now?
It's called Low Magic Weekend. It's on qspatoot.itch.io. That one is for groups, and I'm currently finishing a solo journaling version for you to play by yourself. If you live by yourself and you are a one-person coven and you are having a particularly low magic day.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about mutual care and how it's so inherent to disabled communities. I sometimes run my own setting called Undead Adventures, which features a large number of zombified people who are trying to live out their day-to-day lives together. And I hadn't even put this together, but I have essentially created a disabled community there.
Very
Some of
much.
them missing parts of their bodies through decay. And the community that they have built is a mutual care community. So thank you for that thought. That is going to inform my future play. But I actually mostly wanted to talk about, I mean, for me, I actually don't have a good example of the time that I've seen game mechanics support disability representation. I was thinking about this in prep for the panel, and realizing that I haven't seen it, and I would love to. Like, I'm going to go and look up your game, Penny, because it sounds fantastic. Um, but I do think that there are ways that you can spot the opportunity in existing games that maybe don't explicitly have good disabled rep. And for me, Monster Hearts is one of those games. For those who don't know, Monster Hearts is a game that is about teenagers. It's about your kind of Buffy age teenagers. It's about big emotions, big swings in how you feel about yourself. And it's very, kind of dark and emotional, I guess. Um, and most recently, I played a character called December, who followed an archetype called the Hollow. You follow archetypes in Monster Hearts. And as soon as I saw the Hollow, I was like, that's a disabled archetype. And what caught me was a description of the darkest self of this archetype, which opens with your body is a prison. I was like, oh yeah, as a disabled teenager, I felt that like all the time. It was my darkest self. That's a good descriptor. But that was absolutely how I felt a lot of the time. Um, and so I think it's finding those hooks that enable you to go, actually, that's about disability, or it could be anyway. And kind of running with that to create new realities within these existing games.
There was a few games that I wanted to mention who I think do this exceptionally well. So there's quite a few, so I won't dwell on them, but I would just really encourage people to go and take a look at these games. If you're looking for games that have disability at their core and disabled experience at their core. One of them is called Survival of the Able, and it's by Accessible Games, and it's by Jacob Wood. And by its title, you would not think that it has disability. It's called Survival of the Able. But basically, it's a sort of apocalyptic game where apocalypse hits this town or village that you're in. You are playing a group of disabled characters. The able-bodied characters all flee and leave you to die. But of course, you don't die because you are spoony hackers, as we said before. And the whole game is about your inventiveness and your tenacity and your strength, and to overcome and to survive. So that's a great one to check out. That, as I said, it's like got it at its core. Inspire Isles, I've already mentioned. Night by Genty G is an amazing game, which is played completely in the dark, very immersive experience of the visually impaired experience. And Sign by Thorny Games is an incredible game that is a very, very simple game, but it was inspired by a real event in the 1980s, and it was inspired by the development of Nicaraguan Sign Language, because in the schools they didn't have an official sign language like BSL or ASL. They had nothing, and so these teenagers just had to invent a way to communicate, and they invented their own sign language, and it became the official sign language. And this game puts you in their shoes to invent your own sign language out of necessity. So again, it's about tapping into that resourcefulness, that incredibleness, the genius that exists, that I guess exists in all of us, but that disability can bring to life and can bring to light. So those are great. And I also just want to shout out someone who is just doing such prolific work to bring mechanics to a wide variety of games, especially Pathfinder and D&D. But it's Wheelchair Badger, if you know Wheelchair Badger, Aurelia Keating, an amazing individual. I can't pick out one individual thing they've done because everything they do is so amazing. But they have helped me to create disabled characters, looking at the mechanics of games like Blades in the Dark, Pathfinder, D&D, to create aids for characters which allow you to play an authentic character. So yeah, Sorry, that was a bit of a long list, but I just wanted to, I just got so overwhelmed with how much is out there that's really good that we can shine a spotlight on. People are doing really good things.
Mm.
Mhm.
I actually do have something to add as well that I forgot to mention, but it's such an important cornerstone because one major way that we can make games that help to celebrate and incorporate disability is to make them, this is such an obvious one, but it's like so often overlooked, is to make them actually accessible to read. So like, I mean, look, I'm a graphic designer, I'm a layout designer, an illustrator. I love doing it. I love making beautiful, pretty games. But I know that a beautiful, pretty game in a PDF is an absolute nightmare for a lot of screen readers. So all of my games, like just a standard practice to adopt that I think everyone should adopt is like, if we're being realistic, most of us start out our games in some sort of Google Doc, and that's a plain text document. It's extremely accessible for screen readers. And I think that if you are offering like a beautiful version of your game, then you should also always have a document that is screen reader friendly. So no frou-frou formatting, just, maybe, if there's images, you need to have alt text with them if you have images in the plain text document. Personally, I often just don't have them. I use just the adaptive text because I don't want the format to mess up a screen reader. And I don't, all the screen readers out there, there's just so many. So like, you never know what's going to be more sensitive to what. I'm also always listening, always asking, go on social media, be like, hey, I have this format thing. Can somebody like can some people with the screen readers who need them please chime in and tell me, like, should I do this or should I do this? And then also you learn stuff like people saying like, please always have like a table. If you have a table, just leave it as a table, because if you try to format it to just be next to each other, the screen reader does not know that. And it doesn't pick it up correctly and it can cause serious problems. I was like, fantastic, excellent to know, clocking it, moving on. And then something that I don't yet have for all of my games because it physically takes time and I am also disabled, but I'm a narrator and voice actor. And so I make audiobooks for all of my games. So for example, Low Magic Weekend has a 22-minute audiobook and they're all free. You should never have to pay for access to something just because we're disabled. We have enough disability tax. So I think that one important thing that we can note is, as much as is possible, try to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Sure, we love a beautiful game document, but we also love a beautifully read game document. And by that I mean, everyone's voice, you can always read something aloud and people will get it and hear it and it's fine. If you need assistance with that, you can find someone, ask a friend, hire someone, whatever your budget is. I think it would be great if audiobooks caught on more. I know that I can't see terribly horribly, but also not terribly well. And I often need to listen to things, and having the audiobook, because I absolutely cannot stand most screen readers. They sound like nails on a chalkboard, and you have to pay so much money to try to get a voice in the screen reader that doesn't sound like nails on a chalkboard. And it's like, whatever it may say, I like the sound of my own voice. And I will happily listen to myself explain this, this document and this audiobook. And I'm always trying to hear, like, if somebody's like, hey, when you do this, you tend to do this thing in the audiobooks, and it makes it hard to hear, or it makes it like it's a bit weird, it's confusing. I'm like, great, fantastic. I would love to hear it. I'd love to note it. I'd love to do better going forwards. But just having accessible copies of your work that you can plug into a screen reader, or that if you can listen to in a different way, are always great ways, because we can only tell authentic stories using a game that we can actually play, and we can only play the game if we can actually know what it says. And trying to find as many avenues as possible to make that a possibility and make that part of your default is a really important part of making games more accessible.
Oh, thank you. That's really insightful from all of you. And as someone who has their own difficulties with language processing when it's written down, I personally really appreciate audiobooks. And also, as you say, you have a lovely voice. Lots of other people have lovely voices. It's lovely to be able to actually hear somebody read their own work, or someone who understands what's going on read the work, and have that vocal nuance that you don't always get with the screen readers. There was mention of Miranda. You mentioned running your own setting, which you've realised is very much a disability sort of commune with your and Penny, you mentioned Wheelchair Badger's incredible work. So it's possible to adapt the game that we already know, and to make it easier for disability representation. We've talked about how we can do that, sort of above table, as it were. I will Davis, if does anybody have anything that they want to add in that topic before we move on? And obviously, if we get Lou you to answer the question, then great, we'll have that in here as well.
I think for me, one thing that really frustrates me is when people call back to realism in their games. Oh, we can't have, I don't know, a wheelchair using mage in D&D, because it's not realistic. There is no realism. It's a story. What are you talking about? I think moving on to that fact that it is a story, we are creating these worlds together. They are, even when we're playing from, pre-written adventures, even pre-written settings, they are still stories and we can adapt them and change them. Holding on to that as a kind of key way to challenge your own inherent ableism, which we all have, everyone here has it. And remember that anything is possible in these worlds. You can create any reality that you want to, is just really important and foundational, I think, to removing barriers for good representation in characters.
Absolutely agreed. And that point about realism and it being a fantasy world, and it's yeah, that really riles me. And to hear you talk about that so eloquently is such a joyous experience on my end. So thank you for bringing that up. So, how can game mechanics specifically help us to celebrate disabled identities and to tell meaningful disabled stories?
So that's a great question. I think that the first thing, especially if you're a GM or DM or game person, the first thing that people will often look for are either assistive tools that are baked into the system. So, like, for example, my primary system, Pathfinder, does have some. There's also supplements of various kinds. Penny Blake, what's up? And other things where there are tools that you can add in, just slide into the system. I will say that agnostic of any system, keep in mind and talk about as a table, maybe in session 0 or like before content comes up, talk about world design and making sure that whether you want to bring into the story it recreating access barriers from real life. So, like, for example, if you have a PC or NPC in a wheelchair and there is a cliff, right? Like, how do you want to handle that? Agnostic of any system, there are some assistive tools out there in some systems that will help you, but the thing that will help you the most is talking through it with your table. Other things that would help tell a meaningful story. I think that this is a really good part of the game where if there is something in the rules that's written that is going to like really hurt the fun of a player who has a PC with a disability, this is the primary location to house rule it and talk about what that looks like. So, for example, in my home game, I had a player who drank the swamp jamba juice. The actual player in real life is not disabled, but his character was turned into a centaur. And not that that's a disability, but the size makes a lot of things difficult. I could have run everything rules is written the entire week that his character was a centaur, but that would have hurt a lot of the players' enjoyment of the game. This is something where if you need to house rule it. And if you're not sure, ask your players. And if you are a player, ask your GM.
I mean, also talking about the turning into a centaur and not being a disability necessarily. There's a lot of scope in fantasy and in sci-fi for looking at the social model of
Yeah.
disability, and so talking about, okay, well, this person, in this case, a centaur, and in Julia Centaur especially, and we're talking about size and how that affects how you interact with the world. So there's definitely there's a place for talking about disability from a metaphorical standpoint in fantasy, or metaphorical, allegorical. I'm not entirely certain of the difference between those two terms, but as fantasy as a standard, and of course there is equally important to look at real disabilities from the real world, but there's definitely ways of looking at how disability affects how you interact with the world in a metaphorical or allegorical sense in that way.
I agree, and I think that there are some things that in real life or in the real world, they are major barriers to entry for things, but depending on your system and depending on your game, some of these things might not be disabilities. Some of them might be pluses. Some of them might be bonuses. This is something to always keep in mind. There's so much of the real world leaking into things, and if you get lost in the sauce, you can forget that, this is also like a fantasy or sci-fi or blah, blah, blah type of world. Like, think about that too, especially if you are running into the my player is not able to have fun because of rules as written, then really think about like solutions for that. I know that has been a great path forward for my home games, both the ones that I run and the ones that I'm in.
I'm talking, I suppose, about these fantasy worlds and about our beloved wheelchair-using wizards. It's really important, I think, to have both to have NPCs as well as PCs who are disabled in our worlds, and to have those both as sort of plot relevant, I suppose, people, as well as just background people going about living their lives. So why do we think it is so, assuming we do, which we may not, but I do, but as we say, calm me down, Kieran. But yeah, so why is it important that we do populate our world with disabled NPCs, not just PCs?
I mean, it makes the world just so much more rich. There's so much more possibility. It should be the case that when you're, and forgive me, I'm constantly going to the fantasy references because that's most of the games I play. But when your characters go to a market, as well as all of the babble around them, there should be some people signing somewhere in there. They may not be NPCs that you're intended to go and speak to, although they could be. But they should be there. There should be some people using mobility aids. One of the traders that you talk to could be partially sighted. It should be an embedded part of the world in the same way that having multiple genders is an embedded part of the world. It would be weird if you had your characters walking around a setting and everyone was men. That would be weird, unless that was the point. And
That
this
would be a
one
bit of a
puts-
nightmare.
that would be I would be asking a lot of questions. And in the same way, it should be weird to be walking around a setting and there not be any disabled people. You should be asking questions, if that is the case. I think it's just about normalizing it and pointing out that a world without disabled people is a lesser world.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, we're here in real life, we're everywhere, and making a conscious choice to have a fantasy where we're not there odd is almost like weird is like the nicest way to put it. It's fucked up. We're here. And it takes everyone in the world to make the world. And if we are telling stories, we are helping to reflect the world. And, you know, there's so many people at every table typically, you know, it's never just like one or two, best rarely just one or two people on a regular scenario of a long-term game. And the more we push that we belong, and the more that we show people like we're here in real life, we are here in your fantasy, we are everywhere, and we should be, then the more we get to make other people maybe also start to question when they don't see us in a room, when they don't see us in a space. Because if you're used to not seeing us places, then when you see a space that has excluded us on purpose, you're not even going to notice, you know. And you need to notice, you need to have your eyes open, you need to be checking for us when you go into a space, just like you need to be checking, like being like, is this place white? Because if this place is all white, I don't know if I need to be here, you know. If this is, you walked into a room and it's all people and nobody like you at all, and it's terrifying. That's a, you always ask yourself, like, why am I not here? Why is everyone like me not here? Why am I here? You know, so it's part of shaping the world also, you know, like the real world.
You're totally right. I mean, weird was the wrong word. Sinister is the right
No,
word.
you're right. I mean, it's also very odd. It's certainly very odd as well.
Yeah, I just 100% agree with what both of you have said. So I'm not going to echo that again, but just a slightly different point to bear in mind as well is that if your world is not populated with disabled people the way that the real world is, then how are you going to introduce them when you feel the need to introduce them? And that leads to a very dangerous, like as you said, a very sinister mindset where you get people introducing a disabled NPC only as a pity party or only as a plot hook, and their disability is the plot hook. You know, like maybe they were, oh, it's a poor tiny Tim, look, he's orphaned, and you know, oh dear, he's got a disability, we better help him because he's got a disability, you know, he can't help himself, we need to step in, the heroes need to save the day. And that's you guys, the able-bodied people, you know, need to step in and help this poor disabled person or dragon or what, you know, NPC there that needs your help. And those are not the stories that we want to be encountering when we're coming to play a fun game.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for the storyteller, whoever's running the game, to keep an eye out for that in pre-written adventures. In particular, older adventures quite often fall into having a visible difference making you evil. We all know the kind of James Bond facial differences leading to being evil narrative, and it's really important to check for that kind of nonsense in pre-written stuff before you run it.
I could not agree with anything any of you have said more than I do. I think that it's so. You alluded to this, Miranda. It's so baked in to a lot of pre-written stuff that the disabled person is the villain, or and even when it's not pre-written stuff, I've had experiences where you meet, oh yes, there's this great example. There's this, okay, they're the only disabled person, but at least they're giving me somebody. And then it turns out, surprise twist, for the villain, and it's it makes you feel like you as a player and as a person are worth less. And given how much we encounter that sort of thing in real life anyway, we don't need that coming up in the games we play as well.
And it's such a shame that I say we extremely broadly, speaking for British culture anyway, we're not at a place of nuance yet with disability representation, because I would love a disabled villain. Like, I would love, that'd be great.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, we're nowhere near being able to do that sensitively, and with care on average. Some people I'm sure, but we're nowhere near being able to do that, and it's a real shame because there's a whole world out there that we just can't explore yet because pre-disabled people aren't ready.
Yeah. Especially thinking about film and these depictions that just trickle down into everything, because like what you consume, again, everything in the world makes the world. And if these are the things that are in the world and there's nothing challenging them, it's I know that there have been games, I've seen games try to do a disabled villain. And I think if you are, because I love being villainous, love being an evil. Anyway, I was like, you know what? The F-bomb's probably fine, but maybe let's stop there. Being a bit evil is so fun. It's so fun to play, and we deserve to play everything that we want to play. And absolutely, they're not ready for a lot of it because the people doing it might not know, what the core is that causes it. But I think that if you're gonna try, please make sure that the disability in question is not why they're the villain. I am so sick. I'm so sick. I'm making a podcast about it. I'm so sick of the villain in a wheelchair trope who has always, without fail, they have a magic wheelchair. Without fail, they have a wheelchair that flies. If I had a wheelchair that flies, I wouldn't have a single problem in the goddamn world. Are you kidding me? If I got, basically, I can fly. They have these rich villains who've created the whole world around them, have nothing but control, nothing but agency, nothing but autonomy. And they're just like, I can't use my legs and I'm going to kill everyone about it. And I'm like, I just don't think you've ever talked to somebody who uses a wheelchair, because I love her. She's my legs. And if I had one that flew, and if I had all the money in the world, and if I was in a position of power, you wouldn't hear a goddamn complaint out of me. I could be in pain all the time. I'd be like, I'm shutting the fuck up. I have a magic wheelchair. I don't care about anything else. And so when you're making a villain and the villain is disabled, maybe keep that for the home game, for a lot of it, because it's a sensitive thing. And until you feel more confident in it, it's quite risky, because you have to ask who you're carrying water for, in this depiction, and how is it coming across. But then also when you have a disabled villain, it's just like, just don't make it so that it's this unrealistic ableist trope that completely divorces from how the character could or would be, and just turns us into these flat, offensive. Offensive is such a mild term also here, really, because like, is it offensive? Absolutely. I'm offended. It's horrible, but it's really harmful. These harmful depictions and flat stereotypes, because they're born from an abled person who made a villain and was like, well, if I couldn't use my legs, I would be evil and I'd make it everyone's problem. And I'm like, well, that sounds like a personal journey that you need to deal with between you and a trusted friend and faith leader. That does not sound like Hollywood's problem. Please stop putting that in everything that you create, and please, James Bond, go back to fighting Nazis. That was lovely. Let's revisit maybe just that and stop being ableist. But yeah, it's so complicated, and I think that you bringing up the villains is such an excellent point, because they're like one of the number one offensive portrayals of disabled people is as villains who are not connected to their disability at all. They're just plopped on, like, it's like, I gave my villain brown hair and also a limp, and it's like, well, these are not aesthetic traits that you can pop on like it's a paper doll. So I agree.
That's really incredibly articulated, and could feel your passion coming through. Thank you for sharing all of that. Why is it important to populate our worlds with disabled NPCs, and to ensure that we are representing in that a diverse section of disability, rather than necessarily just, for example, just visible physical disabilities?
Again, normalization is a super, super important part of world building, world existing, people existing in any setting. I will also say that if like this is also a good way to potentially introduce things to your players or the PCs that they've never thought about. So for example, I will use Pathfinder because that's my system of choice. The Pathfinder rules for certain things like the blinded conditions assume that you have a seeing PC and that they're temporarily blinded. And so that system does not work well for people who've been blind their entire lives. There are some important NPCs in my universe who from, existence have had certain things that in the real world you would call disabilities, but they are in the universe that they exist in, they find strength in other things that basically turns it into like an alternate sense. So for example, if you have a blind NPC, perhaps something like echolocation or something like that could be helpful. And these are, you can almost think of them even as boons that like visual based like perception doesn't catch. Like if they're perceiving something through fog or smoke, that would be something that could help rather than hurt. Open up your games to this sort of thinking and worldview and alternate ways of perceiving, and it might make your games richer, PC or NPC.
And actually, just to carry on, there is because you were talking specifically about blindness and about characters who are temporarily blinded or recently blinded, who were previously seeing people. There was a very good article, which we can get in the chat, by Devon Rue, specifically about this is more PCs, but you can absolutely use the same principles with NPCs, talking about playing blind characters in a TTRPG setting. So I will pass that over to Darcy, and we can have that in the chat if folk listening at home wants to have a read. So we have talked just a little bit in there about how what am I saying? But about how these, we talked earlier about not defining disabled characters by their limitations, about taking the whole character and thinking, who is this person? Why is their disability important to them? But also, who are they not just as their disability and not just as the limiting aspects? So does anybody have any advice that they would give to people who wants to perhaps play a disabled character for the first time, and how to balance the difficult aspects of disability with the joyous aspects, and with just making them really fun to play, and someone that you're going to enjoy playing however long your game may be?
I would say that if you are thinking of playing a disabled character, especially someone who does not have the same disability, you do not have the disability of the character that you are going to play, the very first thing you should do is to try and talk to people who do have that disability. And I think that if you don't have any friends who do have that disability, or you don't have anyone in your social circle who does have either that disability or something similar or has some kind of knowledge, then you really need to be asking why. Because as we said earlier, we are here in the world. There are so many of us, we're everywhere. It's the same with, people of every description, as we've already said and established. We are here. And if we're not in the space that you're in such a way that you can come and speak to one of us and say, hey, how could I do this authentically? then really, why are you wanting to play a disabled character? Where are you coming from with that? Because you're clearly not trying to authentically engage with something that is in the life of someone you care about and know and have, friendships, relationships with family members, things like that. So I think your first point of call, if you come up against a brick wall with that, should be then to self-reflect and say, hold on a minute, why do I actually want to do this? And I think that if you do start deeply questioning yourself on that level, then hopefully you will get some good answers. After that, after you've moved on from that, I would say then research and go further even. There is such a rich wealth of information on the internet now about how a wheelchair user can use every type of weapon under the sun. I only learned this because in my work as a sensitivity reader, 90% of it is research, and 90% of it is keeping up to date with the latest wheelchair sword techniques and things like that. It's a fun job, but it's time consuming, but it's fun and it's easy to do. There's no red tape to cut through. You can YouTube search it, you can Google search it. There are organizations and all kinds of information out there for people who want to learn what it's like to have pretty much any given disability. I recently discovered, because I only recently got my AIHA diagnosis, and so of course in the early stages of it I didn't know much about it, but it was a very easy matter to go and find people who did, and to go and speak to people who did, and to go and find out what I can expect to be my trajectory. That same research can be applied to your research if you want to play a disabled character. And as we said earlier, when you're designing your games, yes, it might be a bit of hard work, but if you're not prepared to put in that hard work, then you need to ask, should I really be doing it?
I think
Coming from like a totally different angle on that, I was thinking about, I absolutely agree with everything that you said. Research is so important. And I was actually thinking that if you are intending to play a disabled character, whether it's your own experience or not, someone will have done it before, and they will have come up with a system for making it work on a mechanical level. One of my first introductions to disabled characters in D&D particularly was Mark Thompson's combat wheelchair, which is a very cool set of rules for making your wheelchair have spikes on it and have flamethrowers and all sorts of nonsense in D&D. But there's resources like that out there if you go and look for them. In terms of not making it miserable, making it a fun experience, and a rounded experience, to play a disabled character. I think just remembering that pretty much every disabled person I know has a wicked sense of humor, about being disabled is really important. Like, it's funny. Sometimes the things that our bodies do are hysterically funny, even when they're also extremely annoying. And we can walk the line with that dichotomy. It's not a falsehood to say that it's funny as well as annoying. And just remembering that and kind of holding on to the fact that you don't have to be super serious and dark about your disability all the time, or about the disability that your character has. You can have some fun with it, and you can make it a bit ridiculous sometimes, and that's not inauthentic in my opinion. So I think just try and hold on to that, as well as onto the potentially darker or more painful side too.
moving on to PCs, how do we, because very often this desire with a lot of discourse about making characters authentically limited, and you've already spoken a little bit about speaking to disabled people, speaking to people who have these specific disabilities you want to portray. How do we balance that desire with authentic limitations, with making characters exciting and joyous and just fun?
Yes, that's a great question. I think that a good bet, well, first of all, communication with your table and your GM, but also lean into it. Ask other players if they want to sort of like contribute in some way. In the Mappa Mundi game that we played on Euphoria, the two-shot run by Michelle, I played Yevla. And Yevla is a trans woman who has very limited sight to the same degree or slightly worse than my actual vision, except I have glasses and modern technology. And what I did with this character, especially working with Angel's character and Angel's familiar, which was like a large dog, is reframing the senses. So like when the precise vision is bad, what does that mean? It means like obviously seeing things or things that only have visual markers, I will be at a disadvantage or like extreme disadvantage for perceiving. But it also means that for this character in this system, divining and sensing things like the wind and the movement of birds and leaves and things like that was something that I could lean into. Also with Angel's character's dog, there was a lot of like assistive, like having the dog at my character's side and like swimming through water, which is a very, it's a, how do I say this? I cannot use like my touch senses when I'm swimming through water as that character, having the dog with me and things like that, and still making it so that I can sense things by touching them, smelling them, interacting with them. And I found that in the end, it wasn't that limiting to not have sight, but it did still impact my character. And most importantly, it made me think about the game and playing the game and being in that world so much differently. I never described things visually the entire time I played. I only described like the sound, the texture, the smell, and that made my role play so much more rich.
I love that so very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Angel.
How can we adapt the existing games? So you've spoken about home ruling with or house ruling even with
Mhm.
Pathfinder. How can we adapt existing games to make disability representation easier and to better facilitate disabled players?
So facilitating disabled players to me is almost like another question, so I'll answer them both. I'll start with that first. At a table with a player who has different needs, please do your best to see to those needs. So, for example, my partner has ADHD, and I understand that there needs to be room for stuff like stimming, or I have players who like sketch, players who note take player in unusual ways, players who like bring some undisruptive, quiet thing to the table, and that's always fine. Take breaks, check in with players, especially if they're liable to get overwhelmed or they need more frequent breaks, please do that. As for making the game, ask me the question again.
How can we adapt existing games to make disability representation easier?
Okay, perf. This is a great question. There are a lot of games that I, especially as someone who's new to non-Pathfinder systems, I'm surprised that there isn't even a section like at all about disability. Not to say like how to run it or how to handle it, but just it doesn't exist in the game. I think that if it is important to you, work either within the existing rules and try to tweak things to make it easier for you or reflavor things, or if that feels too restrictive, honestly, again, I am a homebrew gremlin myself, and I think that there are a lot of games where it probably feels scary if you can't find media about disability at all to suggest it, especially if you are not the person running the game. But I would hesitate to not play um, a disabled character, especially if you have like lived experience with that disability, just because of the system. So talk to your GM, talk to the players. I am going to advocate good, strong communication until I'm in the earth. After every
Um,
question, it's like communicate, talk. That's how I feel.
no, it is. I feel very, very similarly. That is certainly my experience has been that anytime there's been something coming up which looks like it might be a big barrier,
Mhm.
I talk to people who are also at the table, and then suddenly it's no longer this great big barrier because they want the people at your table, assuming obviously it won't be true for every table, but tables I've been at, and it sounds like
Mhm.
some of the tables, at least you've been at, people want to engage, people want to tell these stories,
Yes.
even if it's not something they have lived experience with. People want to help you tell the stories you want to tell, just like you want to help them tell the stories they want to tell, and you want to come together and tell and make this great, big, beautiful story together. And yeah, that's obviously me getting a little bit off topic there, but yeah, it's communication, absolutely,
Yes, and
rule number one.
I will also say this. If you are a GM, DM, someone running the game, and you don't have experience with something, I also advocate asking, because
Mm.
I actually just had a session 0 and I had my first, not my first non-binary character, but the first time that it was someone presenting with he, they, she genders, and also with a fairly like fluid physical representation, and I was not exactly sure what that meant and how to handle it respectfully and in a way that like represents their character authentically, and I had that thought for about 2 seconds, and then I was like, let me ask. So I asked them, I sent them a voicemail and I said, how do you want me to represent this character who is the embodiment of many uh, souls drowned in a river who goes by many different pronouns? And they told me, and it was very helpful, and I am going to carry this moving forward into other games where this comes up. Like, how do you role play uh a river spirit Yagwai with 3 genders? I have no idea, but they know. So and now I know.
Mm.
It's great.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. So we often in the games that we're playing will play heroic characters. So that could be heroes in the sense of big high stakes, world is ending, go and stop it or make it less bad. Um, or it can be a group of friends just adapting to how the world is changing around them. But there are always these opportunities to showcase how our characters are heroic. But there are several ways, and I think that what we were talking about earlier with Spoonie hacking is a great example of this. That disabled people can be heroic in ways that are perhaps not necessarily absent, but less common in pre-disabled people. So, it's wondering, does anybody have any thoughts on how we represent that brand of heroism, which is very very specific to disabled people.
I think it's important to make sure you don't fall into the trap of how abled people see heroism, because the last thing I'm sure any of us wants is any more inspiration porn heroes and heroines, and these things that actually end up hurting us so much, because people are like, well, why can't you just push through it? Why can't you just push past it? Why can't you just anything, and it's just like, well, I can't just anything, because if I could just anything, then we wouldn't be here having this conversation. So it's important to check yourself, like we said in the beginning. Make sure that, like, what you're not doing, which is creating this character whose heroism is rooted in disrespecting their limits, in pushing past it, and framing it as a sacrifice for the greater good. And it's just like, well, we don't want to accidentally tell fascist narratives. Last thing that we want to have, the last kind of representation we'd want to see again. And I think it's important to try to find that point between the things that make someone heroic are not ever really tied to their abilities. They're tied to their personality. It's tied to their motivation. Everyone can be brave. Everyone can be not brave. Everyone can decide to risk something for somebody, and make sure that, when you're writing someone, creating a sacrifice, when you're writing someone who is trying to do something at great personal risk, you want to make sure that you don't root it in their disability or in the neglect of themselves, in specifically their disability. Because also, like, sure, we can have a character self-sacrifice something, but it shouldn't be because they're disabled, and then you have a narrative about us being expendable or us being cannon fodder. And it's just like, again, you have to ask yourself, who am I carrying water for when I'm creating a heroine or a hero who is disabled? And it's just like, well, these are the things that are just important. It's just one of those things where it's important as much what you do as what you don't do. And what we don't want is flat inspo porn characters. We want you to create a character who has a disability, and the disability is a huge part of them. It can be a big part of their backstory. It can be a big part of how they've formed their morals and values. It could be that they had their morals and values before and they've just been enhanced, or they've been expanded because of their experience as being disabled. It could be that I think that it's very difficult to tell a narrative with nuance that doesn't accidentally carry a bit of water for someone that you might not want to, when you create a character whose motivation is that they became disabled and then suddenly they knew about disability and they knew about disabled people and they cared about disabled people, and before that they didn't. It's just like, not that that doesn't happen, but I don't think that those are the people that need to have the microphone, to speak for us or to be our heroes and heroines. I think that you should ask yourself, okay, just because it could be, is this the person that I want to be the hero of this story? Or should I maybe give the microphone to a character who cared before or who cared always? So these are things that you want to consider when you're thinking about the motivation of a hero and the striving force that they have in their interactions with the world as a disabled person.
I agree. I was thinking about the Spoonie Hackers thing, which I also love, and about what heroism means when you're disabled. Yeah, of course, disabled characters can perform those big sweeping acts of sacrifice and saving the world, all of that, yes, for sure. But there is also the heroism of resilience that many of us have. Um, and I think there's something really interesting about thinking about, if you're playing, say, in a post-apocalyptic world or in a harsh setting, thinking about disabled characters creating stillness and rest, like rest as an act of heroism. I'm very invested in that personally. Like, what would actually be important in that world if you were disabled, and how would you share that with people? I think drawing back to the mutual care, mutual aid thing, that's so fundamental to many disabled identities. How would that manifest in the world that you're playing in? What would it look like to, I don't know, I guess to educate characters and other NPCs about that perspective and help them to improve their own lives through the lens of disability? Didn't phrase that right, but you know what I mean.
I think it was phrased very eloquently. I think it was a lovely way of saying that. So thank you both. How can heroism sometimes present differently in disabled characters than it can in pre-disabled characters?
Yes. So depending on the disability that is being represented, there are certain things that uh, able-bodied people are find easy, find like they don't have to think about it. That is not the same for disabled people, and I think that in moments where this comes through in roleplay for disabled characters, it can look atypical, especially if you're not used to sitting at tables that tell these kinds of stories. So, for example, I think that loud noises like constant, like alarms or crowded spaces or overstimulation, these sorts of things, I probably never would have thought about because it's not my lived experience. And because I know and love people who go through this, this is the sort of thing, like one tiny example of an environment being what's the word, hostile in a way that's not perhaps not to non-disabled people. I'm sorry, I do not know the PC terms for any of this.
I don't think there are. No, non-disabled's fine, pre-disabled is fine, typically abled is fine. As long as you're saying things in a way which isn't attempting to be malicious, I suppose. And we all know that you're here because you care about these things.
I do.
So yeah, so being and I don't necessarily know what terms are. 'Cause it's also very context dependent.
Mm-hmm.
So pre-disabled, which I've been using, is something I picked up from Miranda when we
Mm-hmm.
recorded earlier,
Mm-hmm.
which I like because people become disabled.
Yeah.
Most people do if they live
Yeah.
long enough. But I've also used typically abled. I've used non-disabled. I've used able-bodied. It's but yeah, it's there are a wide variety of terms, and I think we all understand that if you say something which is perhaps clumsily worded, it's because you've made a mistake, and if you were to be called out on it, then you would take that in,
Yeah.
and you would adjust your language use accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
but thank you for asking anyway. I'm sorry, I don't have a better
Can't
answer.
can't hurt to ask. I again, I am not in real life, I'm not like surrounded by, not non-disabled people. So I don't know any. So it's just me.
Before we wrap up, does anybody have anything that they want to bring up that they think, oh, we touched on this and perhaps we could expand on this further, or oh, there's something I wanted to talk about but haven't had a chance to yet?
I just
Okay.
wanted to mention, sorry,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
Because I was thinking when we were talking about NPCs, most of the examples that we mentioned and that I mentioned were visible
Mm,
disabilities. Um, and I think that it's important that we're representing invisible disabilities, neurodiversities, anything that wouldn't be immediately apparent to
mm,
characters. And it's going to be harder to do that if the NPC is like a two-line character that just exists to sell them a token or something. You know, you may not be able to get to that. But where you do have recurring NPCs, for example, it's really important to be including that as well,
mm.
and not just equate disability with wheelchairs, which is unfortunately common.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, one of my disabilities causes mobility issues and means that I mentioned being an ambulatory wheelchair user, but I'm also mentally ill. I'm also neurodivergent. I also have a cognitive disability, none of which you see on the outside, but all of which, once you get to know me, become it becomes more clear how that shapes me as a person. And yeah, absolutely agreed on more invisible disability representation, whether that be cognitive, intellectual, neurodivergent, whether that be invisible physical disabilities. Yeah, we absolutely need to ensure that we are including the disability is a really wide umbrella term, and trying to it's possibly one of it's possibly one of the widest groupings of people, not just in terms of how it intersects with other marginalized group, which obviously it does, and there's a lot of multiply marginalized disabled people. But even within disability itself, there is so much intersection in how different disabilities, how someone with multiple disabilities, or how someone with only one disability who knows people with other disabilities, how that can affect how you view the world, how you interact with the world, and just who you are as a person. And yeah, so it's absolutely important to represent that vast spectrum. I think we may have briefly covered this, but if you have any additional thoughts, feel free. Otherwise, don't worry. But why is it so important that we make sure we represent invisible disabilities as
Mm.
well as visible disabilities?
This is a great question. So, the disability umbrella, I think a lot of people, okay, I'll only speak about Americans, but a lot of people in my home country or the country where I'm from, they're very, very aware of things like handicapped parking and like wheelchair ramps and things like that. But for a long time, when before I was a wheelchair user, a lot of my own disabilities, such as dyscalculia, PCOS, GERD, and being immunocompromised, these are all invisible. Like chronic pain is invisible. Things like autism or other sort of like mental disabilities, I feel like often get overlooked, but it's a shame, I feel like, to not represent invisible disabilities in games, especially because there's a lot to say. And if it's something that you have personal experience with or people you love have personal experiences with it, it's it would be noticeable to me, if I cut out all of the invisible disability representation in my own games, and it's something that, I hope that, abled GMs, think about, adding into their own games. I think that it, especially if done respectfully and researched properly, I think that it can only make your story more richer, more complete, and um, more representative of the beauty that is the human experience. So the one last thing that I will add is a lot of legacy media, older media, and things like that have some disability representation. Um, and I would absolutely not blame people who don't have lived experiences with those disabilities of seeing those pieces of media and thinking, oh, I understand how this disability works, and putting it like that in your game. But one thing I would say is be careful with like Hollywood or mass media representations of disabilities. So, for example, the Hollywood autism has had a moment in TV where people who have autism are portrayed as these, prodigious savant types, but also that they are antisocial, sometimes like violent, unpredictable. And you can see this across the spectrum, not just with autism, but things where either it's being played for laughs or it's minimized into these like tropey things. I would be careful using that as a baseline of understanding, especially if you grew up in a time where that sort of media was common. Just people who have disabilities are people. And I often find that people are thrilled to tell you about their lived experiences if you just ask. So if you are someone who, by no fault of your own, grew up with these kinds of legacy media, and I mean, it's still happening today, just take what you see on the silver screen with a grain of salt. And if you're not sure, ask someone.
Communication again.
Communication! Oh, your girl fucking loves communication.
Oh, I can see that communication being a GIF right now. This has been really incredible. Thank you all for being here. This is something which I think needs to exist in the world. We need more panels like this. We need more AP featuring disabled stories. And we just need more disability joy in the world. And thanks to everybody for joining us. We wouldn't be doing this. We'd still be talking about this, but we probably wouldn't be doing it, the group of us who are together, and we wouldn't be broadcasting it to people if there was nobody watching. So thank you for joining us. I also want to take a moment just to acknowledge all the work that goes on behind the scenes here. We have our incredible showrunner, Michelle Kelly, who has been incredibly supportive from the very beginning of this process, without whom we wouldn't have got to the point of recording at all, without whom dealing with the issues that we had would have been much more difficult, and who made the whole process, for me, as this being the first time I'd pitched anything to anywhere, much less intimidating. And we have our producer and editor, JC Darcy, who is doing all the work that you will see on screen, and a lot of the work that you won't see, in making sure that we had some gremlins at the beginning of this recording. Darcy sorted those excellently. We were able to keep going. Darcy will also be doing all the editing to make it look and sound as good as it does. So please do thank both of them in the chat if you can. And if you have a chance to work with them, do. Incredible people. Highly recommend working with them. Same goes for anybody on this panel. We'll now say goodbye in reverse order around the overlay. So starting with Angel, and we're going to just ask you to remind everybody who you are and just to tell us about any projects that you want people to know about, whether that's to do with disability or TTRPGs, or neither, it's something else, but you think people will still be interested.
All right, everybody. I've been Angel Amore, aka the games designer Cutest Patoot Games, which is where you can find my games at cutestpatoot.itch.io. I have a bunch of games about a variety of experiences. I have a beloved game about being trans, a beloved game about loving and sharing music. I have games about magical cats, which is a lot of urban fantasy in between, and a lot of things that are not fantasy, which is also fun to explore in TTRPGs. So there's probably something for everyone because there's just so much stuff on there. And every copy of my game that doesn't currently have an audiobook version is receiving one as I work through them in between all of my other work. So if you get it and it doesn't have one yet, it will have one. Don't worry. And they will always be free parts of what you can download. Apart from that, I'm a podcast producer. You can find me and keep up with everything I do on Blue Sky, where I still have the at cutestpatoot.h.io as my Blue Sky domain. I'm not on any other socials where I yap nearly as much as that. And keep an eye out of that space, because hopefully by the end of this year, the show that I've been developing for the last year will be out. It's going to be a limited series called Hell on Wheels, where we discuss wheelchair representation in films. And I will try very hard to make it not just be an angry podcast, although there will be quite a bit of passion in those episodes, and rightfully so, because the aim is to help you open your eyes to the ways that we are represented in media and the ways that that is not so great. And if you know what's wrong, you won't do it, and you can do better, and you can seek better, and you can ask for better. So that is the core driving motivation behind the film, and not just my virulent hatred of, and I'm so sorry, Detective Pikachu. So please make sure to keep an eye on that space. It's been an honor to talk about these things with everybody, and I hope that we were able to make people feel seen and heard, and I hope that we were able to inspire people and teach people maybe some new stuff. So thank you for the opportunity, and I pass it along back to you, Kieran.
Well, thank you for being here. It's been incredible to hear all of your insights, and to see you taking such time and energy to give us those insights. We will pass on to Penny now. If you would like to extroduce yourself, I don't think that's a word. Say goodbye.
It is now. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I am Penny Blake. You can find me on Blue Sky. If you are looking for a sensitivity reader or an editor for your project, just hit me up on Blue Sky, drop me a DM. They're always open and very friendly and approachable. I've also got some games on Itch, which are mostly about Romani folklore and rooted in intersectional Romani queer and disabled experience. Most of them are solo games, but there are also some duets on there and some supplements for other things, but it's mostly solos and duets. So and yeah, almost all of them have accessible versions of them. If they don't have them, then that's just because I am disabled and it takes me a little longer to get every version up there. But if you purchase one file, you get all the updates for free. So you can buy with confidence on that. But yeah, just a huge thank you to all of you for joining us, and to Kieran and the other panelists. It's been an absolute joy to talk about all this with you, and especially to Euphoria, who are always a joy to work with. Thank you.
Again, thank you for being here. We know that it takes a lot of energy for any one of us, for me, and I would assume for a lot of you, to actually do something like this. So it's really, really appreciated that you were willing to give up your time and to choose to use your spoony hacking abilities, to come and join us today. And Miranda.
Hello, everyone. I have been Miranda Debenham. You can find me on Blue Sky at mdebenham1. I'm an access consultant and available for sensitivity reading as well. I wanted to shout out a movement that is very pressing at the moment, Crips Against the Cuts. Please look us up on social media. We're on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook. And we would love your support to push back on what is happening at the moment on a national level. Beyond that, though, I wanted to say thank you to Kieran and Euphoria for curating a exclusively disabled space for this panel. I love it. I think there are conversations that you can only really have in a exclusive space like this. A level of mutual understanding that you just can't find elsewhere, and I find it so valuable and so helpful for opening up these conversations and making them nuanced and deep. So thanks to everyone involved in getting this done. It's been great.
I've said this twice already, but thank you so much for choosing to engage with this exclusively disabled space. It's if there weren't people already out there like yourself um, who were putting out stuff about being disabled, then I would never have had uh, the confidence, I suppose, to pitch something like this to Euphoria. So thank you for your part in making this happen, even before we got to the point of announcing it and casting for it.
Hi again. Thank you so much for having me. I have loved being here. I have socials. You can find them if you want. The thing that I will plug instead of that is there are amazing things happening for Disability Month here on Euphoria. Mech-tember is also rolling through on its shiny chrome wheels. If you are interested in diverse representation by all sorts of wonderful, hilarious, irreverent people, please check it out.
Thank you. It's been lovely to have you on and to chat with you about this. It's you've got some really incredible insights, and it's obvious that you're very passionate about this, and that really comes through. So
Oh,
thank you so much for joining me.
of course. I was so happy to.
So myself, I should tell you who I am as well. My name's Kieran. I use they them pronouns. In terms of projects I go on, I do a little bit of production stuff at Pastors Tables. I do some editing stuff with the Queer XP. Um, Other than that, I hop about and do things here and there when it suits me and when I'm able to. Um, I don't know exactly what I'll be doing end of July. I've just finished a big charity event thing, so I'm on a little bit of a rest after that. So, but when I do eventually have something else going out which isn't something I've already mentioned, then that will go up on my Curved, which is flightless7.curved.co, and on my Blue Sky thing, which is flightless7, which I not massively active on because it's a high energy activity for me. But I try to keep it up to date for anything I'm doing, and I enjoy interacting with folk when I have the energy to do so. And with that, thank you again for joining us. We all love that you've chosen to come and tune in and listen to us talking about something which is really important to us. I'll echo what Angel said, that I hope we've given you something to think about, and perhaps some inspiration about how you can bring bring disabled narratives into your games in a way which is respectful and joyous and just fun. Um, so goodbye, I suppose. Bye bye.
Bye.